It all started with a combine harvester and a middle finger. Hers, not mine. She was behind me on the county road, honking like the world was ending, trapped behind my big green John Deere doing a steady 17 miles per hour. Now, I'll admit, maybe I was taking my time, letting the sun catch the morning dew off the cornfields, chewing on a toothpick like I had all the time in the world. But I do that drive every harvest season, every year. No one's ever raised hell about it. Until Judith. Maples. Judith. God help us, she was new. Moved in 6 months ago with her yappy white Pomeranian and an HOA rule book clutched tighter than a Bible at Sunday service. Middle-aged, twice divorced, and with the haircut of a woman who always demands to speak to the manager. She wore her authority like a Kevlar vest. You'd think she was a 4-star general, and this town, my town, was under martial law. It was just Whispering Pines Estates. A quiet, 2-street cul-de-sac with flower boxes and mailboxes shaped like barns. Judith made it a battlefield. The first red flag came flapping with a citation notice duct taped to my mailbox. Improper placement of agricultural equipment. She said my combine, parked at the edge of my property line during harvest week, disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. I laughed. At first, but then came the fine. $150. I figured it was just a misunderstanding. So I walked over. She opened her door like she'd been expecting me, her lips pulled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sheriff Branson," she purred. "So nice to see you on this side of the badge." "Judith," I said slowly. "That combine's been parked there every October since I was old enough to reach the clutch." She adjusted her pearls. Real or fake, I couldn't tell. And handed me a copy of the HOA handbook she had annotated in red ink. "I've been elected interim president while Mr. Delaney recovers from his hip surgery," she said, like that gave her presidential authority. "Over my life, and I take community standards very seriously." "Judith," I said, "that machine feeds this town." "And it's an eyesore," she snapped. That was our first face-to-face, and like a bad rash, it just got worse. Week 2, I got another citation, this time for vehicle obstruction, because I was towing my hay trailer down the back road past her house, and she got stuck behind me again. She actually called the county sheriff's office to report me. Imagine her surprise when I answered the radio. "This is Sheriff Branson," I said, squinting into the dispatcher's static. "Say again?" Silence. Then, "Never mind." I thought that might have been the end of it. It wasn't. It was just foreplay. By week 3, Judith was in full-on tyranny mode. Passive-aggressive notes were tucked under windshield wipers all over the neighborhood. "Your holiday lights are up too early." "Your dog barked past acceptable decibel levels." "Your grass is 2.3 inches. The limit is 2. She measured with a ruler. I'm not kidding. People started whispering. A few of the older residents, like Mrs. Hendricks with the begonias, began muttering about her behind closed doors, but no one wanted to cross her outright. She had a gift for rules, twisting them, weaponizing them, turning neighbor against neighbor with fines, threats, and bureaucracy that bled you dry with red tape. Then she came after me where it really hurt. The community BBQ. I've hosted it every fall since my dad passed the badge to me. It's tradition. Free food, bluegrass music, and the smell of brisket for miles. Judith canceled it. She issued a community-wide notice citing fire hazard concerns, noise ordinances, and improper public gathering permits. She threatened to report any attendees to the county health department. I confronted her again. This time, in front of her precious HOA board, 3 meek retirees who looked like they missed bingo night for this meeting. "You're canceling a BBQ that's older than your Botox?" I said, arms folded. Her smile never broke. "Rules are rules, Sheriff. You're pushing folks too hard. Someone has to maintain standards." The board said nothing. Cowards. And still, I stayed calm, because Judith wanted me to lose. Wanted me to go full badge and boot on her so she could cry harassment. But I didn't. I let her build her little kingdom, brick by tyrannical brick, until she tried to hit me with a moving violation. That's right, the combine incident. She followed me again, down the road into town, filming me with her phone, horn blaring. I pulled into the co-op lot and hopped down. She screeched into the gravel behind me, stormed out of her SUV, and waved a printed copy of the state vehicle code in my face. "You are operating an unlicensed farm vehicle on a public road under non-exempt conditions," she said, huffing, "and impeding traffic. That is a criminal offense." I looked at her, then at the combine, then back at her. "You just tried to citizens arrest the sheriff," I said flatly. She didn't blink. "I will take this to the county. You're not above the law." I leaned in, quiet, so only she could hear. "Judith, I am the law. That night I found a complaint filed against me with the county commissioner's office. She actually did it. And that's when I realized something important. This wasn't about grass height or community cookouts. Judith wasn't enforcing rules. She was building an empire, one where fear wore a sundress and knockoff Gucci heels. But empires fall, especially when they build on stolen land. And as fate would have it, I just uncovered the foundation crack. That was going to bring the whole damn thing down. But first, I had to bait her into stepping too far. Baiting Judith Maples wasn't hard. The woman had the restraint of a raccoon in a candy store. You dangle anything that smells like power in front of her, and she'll tear through it without looking twice. The trick was to make it look like a win. So I played dumb. I let her think I was rattled. Didn't push back when the county commissioner's office sent me a formal inquiry about vehicular misconduct. Hell, I even smiled through it. I knew the commissioner personally, played high school ball with him. He called me that same night and said, "Luke, who the hell is Judith Maples? And why is she threatening to contact a state oversight committee if we don't investigate you?" I told him, "Just give her enough rope." He chuckled. "You got a plan?" "Oh," I said. "I got more than that. I started small, subtle. I set my mailbox 2 inches too high, then left my trash cans out an extra day. Let the weeds along my fence line hit 3 inches. All violations, of course. All reported." Judith was practically frothing at the mouth delivering my notices. Each one came with a new, fine, escalating language and a handwritten note in looping cursive with passive-aggressive jabs like, "Even those who wear a badge must follow the rules." Her power was swelling like a tick on a blood vein. She started, holding emergency HOA meetings weekly, which, according to the actual HOA bylaws, wasn't a thing. But no one stopped her. Fear is a funny thing. It doesn't need facts, just volume. And Judith? She was loud. She'd march through the neighborhood with a clipboard like she was conducting military inspections, took pictures of teenagers, Halloween decorations, and filed a visual disturbance complaint, shut down a kid's lemonade stand for unlicensed commercial activity, cited one elderly man for having wind chimes because they were auditory litter. But behind all that fake poise, I could see it. She was slipping. The more control she thought she had, the more reckless she got. That's when I started visiting old man Delaney. You remember him, the original HOA president. Broke his hip back in June. Sweet guy. Used to run the board fair and square. Didn't get in anyone's business unless he had to. Judith claimed she'd been appointed by default during his recovery. Funny thing, though, Delaney didn't remember that. "I never authorized anything," he told me, wincing as he shifted in his recliner. "She said she'd just help, with a few things while I was in the hospital." "Did you sign anything?" I asked, flipping open my notebook. "Nope," he said. "Nothing official. I figured she was just being neighborly." Neighborly. Right. Now I had 2 threads. 1. Judith had seized control of the HOA without a proper vote. 2. She was enforcing policies in direct violation of state HOA law. But again, I couldn't go public. Not yet. If I outed her too soon, she'd dig in, claim slander, maybe even sue. No. I needed her to burn the whole house down with her own match. So I lit one for her. I spread a little rumor at the gas station. Nothing big, just loud enough for it to reach her. "Heard Luke's hosting a Halloween party," I said casually to the cashier. "Big one. Food, fireworks, full setup. Might bring the band." By the next morning, the rumor had legs and a speedometer. Judith showed up at my front porch in that lemon-colored blazer she wore like a crown. "You're planning an unsanctioned public gathering on HOA property," she said, voice clipped. "It's my backyard," I replied innocently. "Didn't realize I needed federal approval to grill hot dogs." She shoved a fresh violation notice into my chest. "Any use of amplified music or fireworks within HOA boundaries must be approved by the board." "Which I lead," she emphasized. I nodded slowly. "You sure you legally lead it, Judith?" For the first time, her smile twitched, but she doubled down. She always did. That week, I hosted the most boring Halloween party in town. 2 lawn chairs and a fire pit. No guests, no music. Just me and my dog, sipping sweet tea. But Judith? She brought the cops. Well, she tried. She called the county sheriff's department and filed a noise complaint again and again. Dispatch sent it to me. I answered from my lawn chair, radio in one hand, tea in the other. "This is Sheriff Branson. I'm on scene. Situation is under control." I swear I heard her scream from across the street. And still, I let her climb higher. That's when she made her first real mistake. She issued liens, actual property lines. 3 of them. One for an elderly couple with peeling paint on their shutters. Another for a widower who hadn't edged his lawn in a month. His wife had just passed, for God's sake. And the third, me. Failure to comply with multiple violation notices resulting in structural obstruction and public nuisance. Her exact words. Now, normally, HOA liens have to go through a lengthy legal process. They require board votes, proper documentation, and homeowner notification. Judith skipped all of it. She filed them herself, using a template she found online. Forged board approval, falsified letterhead, the whole damn circus. It was the break I needed. I let her post the lien notice on my door, let her feel that final gasp of power. Then I made my move, but not in public. Not yet. First, I paid a quiet visit to the county clerk's office. Got copies of every document Judith had filed. Cross-referenced them with the HOA bylaws and Delaney's original filings. Brought them to a lawyer, friend of mine, then 2 more. They all said the same thing. She was dead wrong, and it was criminal. But here's the thing. I wasn't interested in just getting her charged. I wanted her exposed. So I went to the one person I knew would crack her from the inside. Margaret. Lynn Walker. Margaret Lynn was a founding member of Whispering Pines, and no one messed with her rose garden. Judith had cited her twice. The woman was quietly fuming. I laid it out for her, showed her the documents, the fake votes, the forged signatures, told her about the liens, watched her face go, redder than her prized tulips. And then I asked her one simple question. How would you like to be HOA president? Her smile answered for her, but Judith wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Because that night, as I came home from the station, headlights flared in my driveway, her SUV blocking the whole damn thing. And she was waiting by my porch, clipboard. In one hand, something else in the other, a stack of manila folders. "I thought you should know," she said calmly. "I've submitted a formal ethics complaint against you. With the state board. I've got records, photos, documented harassment." She smiled that smug, dead-eyed smile. "This isn't just HOA anymore, Sheriff. This is your career." Then she handed me a folder. The top photo was of me talking to Delaney on his porch. She'd been watching me, following me. She thought she was 3 moves ahead. But she didn't know that Margaret Lynn had already called an emergency town meeting and that everyone in the neighborhood was coming. Even the ones she thought still feared her, and they weren't coming to vote. They were coming to witness something. Because what? Judith didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that in one of those folders she handed me, she had included the very thing that would end her. I flipped open the folder right there on my porch, the cool night pressing in like a held breath. Judith stood with her arms folded, watching me scan the pages like a hawk studying a squirrel about to step wrong. What I saw nearly made me laugh out loud. It was a printout of an email chain. At first glance, it was just more of her evidence. Photos. Of my combine parked along County Route 17, a few blurry snapshots of me speaking with Delaney, and her paranoid little summaries typed out in 14-point Times New Roman. But then I saw it. Buried halfway down the email chain was a reply she hadn't meant to include. One she clearly forgot to delete. A message from a paralegal named Brent who worked in a real estate firm 2 towns over. He'd written, "As previously explained, you cannot file liens without a vote from a legally recognized board. Per state law, your current HOA structure is invalid until reinstated by democratic election. Filing under false pretenses could be considered fraud." There it was. In her own paperwork. In her own folder. Proof she knew she was breaking the law. And did it anyway. That email was a smoking gun with her fingerprints all over it. I looked up. "Judith," I said, keeping my voice level, "I appreciate you compiling all this. Really." Her eyes narrowed. "You're not taking this seriously." "No, I am," I said. "More than you know." And I closed the folder real gentle like I was sealing a casket. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of worry. Out of sheer anticipation. My plan had been working like clockwork. I just didn't expect her to hand me the detonator herself. But I wasn't about to use it yet. First came the town meeting. Margaret Lynn had spread the word like wildfire. Officially, it was an informational gathering about HOA governance. Unofficially, it was the resistance. The community, nearly. The whole damn cul-de-sac packed into the community center like sardines. Lawn chairs scraped, thermoses clicked open, and folks whispered like they were waiting for a sermon or a public hanging. Maybe both. Judith arrived late, of course. Power move. She wore a navy pantsuit this time, hair slicked back so tight it looked painful. Clipboard in hand, she strutted to the front of the room and took a seat like she was royalty granting an audience. Margaret Lynn took the podium. "Thank you all for coming," she said, voice calm but sharp. "I believe we need to talk about what's been happening to our community." And then, like she was setting fire to dry kindling, she started listing the absurd violations Judith had handed out. One after another. The Halloween wind chimes. The lemonade stand. The BBQ. "Now, I've reviewed our HOA bylaws," Margaret continued, flipping through a folder of her own, "and I found no record of a legal vote installing Mrs. Maples as acting president. Nor do I see any authorization for the liens she's filed against members of this community." Judith stood slowly. "I am well within my authority to enforce community standards." "You assumed authority," Margaret snapped. "You took control without proper election, issued threats, and manipulated documents to justify your power." The room crackled with tension. Judith laughed, dry and sharp. "This is nothing but hearsay. You people wouldn't know proper procedure if it hit you in the—" I stood. "Actually," I said, voice carrying over the crowd, "that's where I come in." I walked to the front of the room. Judith's face tightened as I placed her folder on the table. "This," I said, flipping to the email, "is correspondence between Mrs. Maples and a legal advisor. She was informed her actions were unlawful. She knew it, and she proceeded anyway." I turned to the crowd. "This is fraud and intimidation and misuse of a position she never had the right to claim." The room went quiet. Then Mrs. Hendricks, the sweet old woman with the begonias, stood and said, "Throw the book at her, Sheriff." Judith's smile twitched, but she didn't flinch. "Not yet. I'll be filing formal charges," I said. "But before that, I need to make sure the community understands just how deep this goes." I held up another document, one I hadn't shown anyone yet. This is a record of property title adjustments, filed under Judith Maples' name. She tried to rezone the HOA common lot into private land, under her ownership, quietly, illegally. Gasps rippled through the room like wind through wheat. Judith finally cracked. "You people are so ungrateful," she hissed, spinning toward the crowd. "I've kept this neighborhood livable. I've upheld standards. Without me, you'd all be buried in weeds and garbage cans and hillbilly parades." "Hillbilly parades," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You let livestock onto the green," she shrieked, pointing at me. "You used the community center to host a chili contest without board approval. You parked a combine next to my Japanese maple." "I was harvesting corn," I said. which, last I checked, feeds people. Judith's voice kept climbing. You're all just jealous. I brought order to this chaos. No, Margaret, Lynn said, standing tall. You brought fear. And now you're about to find out what it feels like when no one's afraid of you anymore. Judith looked around. Her allies, if she ever had any, were stone silent. Even her lapdog board members stared at the floor. But the moment wasn't done yet. Because then, the doors opened. And in walked Delaney, cane tapping the floor, eyes locked on Judith like he was seeing her for the first time. I never authorized. You, he said. You lied. You forged my signature. I did what was necessary, she snapped. You were incompetent. You were never elected, he said simply, and that was the real death blow. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The silence said it all. But before I could finish, before the final card dropped, Judith did something I didn't expect. She laughed. Not the fake, clipped kind she always used. This one was real, unhinged. The kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl. You think this matters? She said, wiping her eyes. You think I don't have backup plans? You think I'd go this far without leverage? You haven't even scratched the surface. And then she reached into her briefcase, pulled out a folder with a red tab. She held it up. I know things, she said, eyes boring into mine. About you, about your family, your land, your past. And if you think this little mutiny will stop me, you're not half as smart as you pretend to be. She smiled. Let's see how well. Your town rallies when they find out what the Branson family buried out by the East Field 30 years ago. My blood froze, because I hadn't heard anyone speak that sentence in over 2 decades. She wasn't bluffing. Every room has that moment. The beat when the air changes and everyone can feel it without saying a word. That was this moment. Judith. Maples held up that red-tabbed folder like it was the ace of spades, like she'd been sitting on the nuclear button the entire time. Her smile was pure venom, lips curved in triumph. The kind of look someone wears when they think they've just stepped off the chessboard and won the whole damn war. And to be honest, for a second, I felt it too. The East Field. 30 years ago. She wasn't bluffing, but she also didn't know the full story. The room fell dead silent. Margaret Lynn's jaw clenched. Delaney looked confused, like he'd just walked into a room mid-explosion. The neighbors, once rallying behind the takedown, suddenly shrank back, in their chairs, unsure of what they were about to be a part of. Judith turned to the crowd, like a performer taking the stage. Did you all really think this man was your savior? She sneered. Your heroic sheriff with his corn-fed charm and his tidy little boots? There's a reason his family name is plastered on half the deeds in this town. There's a reason no one ever talks about the Branson settlement of '94. My fists clenched at my sides. You're dredging up a 30-year-old land dispute, I said slowly. You think that's going to save you? She cocked her head. Not save me, Luke. End you. And then she opened the folder. Inside were copies of records, old deeds, faded newspaper clippings, and one photo. Black and white. Grainy, a bulldozer. A broken fence. Men in suits standing in the East Field. She waved it like a flag. Branson Farms acquired 5 acres of disputed county land. Land originally designated for public trust. Your daddy bought it in a closed-door auction. The same year your uncle got a seat on the zoning board. Funny timing, don't you think? My jaw tightened. I hadn't heard anyone say it out loud in years. Hell, most of the town either didn't know or didn't care anymore. It was ancient history, but she was right about the timeline. Tell. Me, Sheriff, she said, taking a step toward me. How many hands were greased to make that field yours? How many papers quietly disappeared at the county clerk's office? You think your badge protects you from a scandal like that? And that was the moment I stepped forward. Judith, I said calmly, you ever wonder why no one's made a fuss about that field in 30 years? She paused. Because it's already been investigated, I said. Twice. Once in '96, again in 2010 when the County Zoning Commission was audited. I turned to the crowd. My father did buy that land, but he didn't steal it. It was put up in a legal emergency auction when the previous owners defaulted and the county had to raise funds. He had the papers, the witnesses, and the receipts. Every inch of that land has been cleared. Judith's eyes flickered, just for a moment. Doubt. But your uncle recused himself from the vote, I said. It's all on record. Hell, the files are public. Which tells me something, Judith. I took another step closer, voice low. If you found that file, you know it doesn't prove anything, which means this isn't about truth. It's about distraction. I looked out over the crowd. She knows she's cornered, I said. She's waving old ghosts around, hoping one of them will bite. But Judith wasn't done. Not yet. Even if your hands are clean, she snapped, you're still complicit in covering up corruption. You never told the town. You let them believe you were just another farmer, just a good old boy. I nodded slowly. I never lied about my family's past, and I never used it to control people. I turned toward the projector screen set up, behind the podium, meant for HOA updates and holiday plans. But I had something else ready. I clicked the remote in my hand, and the screen lit up. Emails, paperwork, the fake liens, the forged Delaney signature, the scanned rezoning document. She filed behind the board's back. I even had a screenshot of the message she sent to her real estate contact. If I can get the common lot under my name before the new vote, I'll have leverage. No one can stop me once it's mine. Gasps erupted around the room. Judith's face drained of color. I was trying to protect property value, she muttered. I clicked again. A copy of a check. From a landscaping company. $5,000. Payee, Judith Maples. Memo. Consultation and transfer fee. Pending lot acquisition. Margaret Lynn stepped forward, voice steady. You tried to sell our park to a developer, Judith. That wasn't protecting anything. That was theft. And finally, Judith cracked. No, she shouted. You people don't get it. I gave this place structure. Without me, it's going to fall into trash heaps and garden gnomes. You need me. But the crowd was done. They stood, one by one, not shouting, not angry, just done. Judith's voice trembled as she tried to regain control. You think you've won? You think this town is safe now? I know people, lawyers, board, members. Delaney stepped beside me. Judith, he said, we're calling a special vote right now to remove you permanently from any association with the HOA. Anyone in favor? Hands shot up, nearly every single one. And Judith? She just stood there, a woman who'd built her house of power brick by petty brick, watching it fall. No one argued. No one consoled her. They simply turned away. I stepped up beside her. You'll be hearing from the county DA, I said. And I suggest you find a real lawyer. You're gonna need one. She stared at me, eyes glassy. This isn't over, she whispered. It's never over. But it was. Because as I watched her walk out of that room, folder clutched tight to her chest, hair disheveled, suit wrinkled from her own collapse, I realized something. She didn't want power. She needed it. And without it, Judith Maples wasn't anything at all. She moved out within the month. For sale sign went up the day after her court summons arrived. No one bought the house for a while. Folks said it had a bad aura. One kid swore he saw Judith's ghost standing in the window with a clipboard. I let him believe it. The HOA held a real vote. Margaret Lynn won by a landslide. First order of business, burn the old rule book in a ceremonial fire. The second, replanting the community garden Judith had bulldozed to expand common parking. As for me, I got a thank you pie from every porch for 3 weeks straight. And the combine? Oh, I drive it extra slow now, especially past Judith's old house, just in case she's watching, wherever she is, because you never really forget the moment someone tries to destroy your life with a smile and a stapler. But in Whispering Pines, we've got a new motto now. Don't start none, won't be none.